Welcome to the complete story of Sidney Pagon, legendary Jamaican Member of Parliament for Northeast St. Elizabeth, Jamaica. This is part 1 and part 2 of his story. Coming up, alright, so I am at the foot of Pagon Drive here in. So this is the grave of his first wife, Ruby Elitha Pagon. As you know, she was born Ruby Elitha Spence, then they got married. Let's read what's written there. So here we have, it says, the island of Jamaica has had some ambitious citizens who had made significant contribution to the progress and development of the nation. One such citizen was Sidney Pagon. With his unwavering commitment to public service and his astute decision-making, Sidney Pagon had captured the hearts of many Jamaicans, particularly those living in Northeast St. Elizabeth, which he represented for over 20 years. In this video, I will delve into the key achievement of this ambitious and industrious figure in the history of Jamaica. I will also look at the impact he has made on the Jamaican society. Welcome to Jamaican Chapter. Born on July 28, 1925, on the island of Cuba, Sidney Ralph Pagon had moved to Jamaica, where he lived out his adult life. He established himself as an industrious teacher, farmer, businessman, family man, counselor, lay preacher, and politician. He met and fell in love with a young woman named Ruby Elitha Spence. The couple got married and had children together. Mistress Elitha Pagon was born as Ruby Elitha Spence on August 16, 1925 in the community of Darleston, Westmoreland. Her father's name was Walter Spence and her mother's name was Catherine Taylor. The young Ruby grew up with a passion for education, and as an adult she became a teacher and later a justice of the peace. She served as the first principal of the Goshen Primary School from January 1963 until her death in February 1972 at age 46. She was buried in the churchyard of the Goshen Moravian Church. Sidney Pagon soon recovered from the untimely death of his beloved wife and married again to a young woman called Valerie. Before the death of his wife Ruby, Sidney Pagon had gotten involved in representational politics as a means to do more with his life. He formally joined party PNP in the 1950s, successfully winning a seat as councillor in the St. Elizabeth Municipal Corporation. Sidney Pagon's likability, social attitude and hard work as a councillor paid off, because when he ran for Member of Parliament for North East St. Elizabeth in the 1959 general election, he was the people's favorite. In that year, 1959, the first-timer Sidney Pagon was up against the JLP candidate Ronald E. Taylor, a farmer by profession. 10,666 people voted. When the election results were announced, Sidney Pagon received 6,370 votes to Ronald E. Taylor's 3,764 votes. Victory for Sidney Pagon was clear. The next general election was called in 1962. This election was called early because the general election was not due until 1964. Anyway, the 1962 general election was probably the most important one in Jamaica's history, because the political party to win that election would lead Jamaica into independence. In this 1962 general election, the incumbent Sidney Pagon was challenged by JLP candidate Lionel Densham, a farmer by profession and a well-liked man. So loved was Densham, who was a white man, that Pagon knew the challenge was a significantly tough one. 11,227 ballots were cast, 85 of which were rejected. When the election results were announced, it was close. Lionel Densham received 5,148 votes. Sidney Pagon, on the other hand, received 5,994 votes, just 846 votes more that made him win. Sidney Pagon had managed to keep the seat as Member of Parliament for North East St. Elizabeth. The next general election was called in February 1967. By this time, Sidney Pagon had gotten almost 5 years in his second term to prove himself worthy to the people of North East St. Elizabeth. But did he? Only the votes could tell. Sidney Pagon was challenged in the 1967 general election by JLP candidate Vidina Falconer, a minister of religion from Black River. 9,592 persons voted across Northeast St. Elizabeth. Out of the 9,592 ballots cast, 80 were rejected. Vedina Falconer received 4,357 votes. Sidney Pagon, on the other hand, received a total of 5,155 votes, sending Falconer back to church. Sidney Pagon then continued on in his third consecutive term as Member of Parliament. He used the next 5 years dealing with issues affecting his constituency and building closer relationships with the people. 5 years gradually passed, and the ruling party JLP announced the next general election to be held on February 29, 1972. By this time, the opposition party PNP had a new, handsome and energetic leader, Michael Manley. Michael Manley was elected leader of the People's National Party PNP back in 1969 after his father, Norman Manley, had retired. The PNP entered the 1972 general election with the new promises, strategies, and ideas of Michael Manley. Down in Northeast St. Elizabeth, Sidney Pagon was challenged by the JLP candidate Owen Stafford, an accountant by profession, and independent candidate Herbert Thomas, a minister of religion. It was 2 against 1. 9,328 persons voted across Northeast St. Elizabeth. Out of the 9,328 ballots, 64 ballots were rejected. The election results came in, and the results were as follows. Herbert Thomas, independent, 123 votes. Owen Stafford, JLP candidate, 2,749 votes. Sidney Pagon, PNP, 6,392 votes. A fourth consecutive win for Sidney Pagon. The PNP also won the general election, winning 37 parliamentary seats over the JLP's 16 seats. This was the first win for the PNP since Jamaica became an independent country. With the PNP now in power, it meant that Sidney Pagon was in a better position to do more as Member of Parliament. By 1973, he was appointed Minister of Regional Affairs. After 4 years, the next general election was due in 1976. That year, nomination day was announced for November 29 and voting day on December 15. There were now 60 constituencies across the island, an increase from the previous 53. The increase happened only in St. Andrew, Kingston, St. Thomas, and St. James. For this 1976 general election, the JLP was determined to break the stronghold that Sidney Pagon had over Northeast St. Elizabeth. He has been holding the seat for the last 17 years, never losing an election. He was like a king with no sign of weakness. Still, the JLP felt there was a chance of winning. They chose to put a man called William J.C. Hutchinson against Sidney Pagon in the 1976 general election. 14,102 persons voted. Out of the 14,102 ballots cast in Northeast St. Elizabeth, 99 were rejected. Fingers were crossed as the ballots were counted. William J.C. Hutchinson was burning with optimism. He had seen how many people of Northeast St. Elizabeth met and cheered for him during the campaign, so he was optimistic that he would win against Sidney Pagon. On the other hand, Sidney Pagon, the strongman, was rather relaxed. Then the results came in. The 1976 election results were as follows. William J.C. Hutchinson, 6,270 votes. Sidney Pagon, 7,733 votes. Sidney Pagon won. Sidney Pagon's party, the PNP, also won, winning 47 seats to the JLP's 13 seats. The people of Northeast St. Elizabeth loved Pagon for his forward-thinking, dedication to his promises, and his down-to-earth personality. Sidney Pagon served as Member of Parliament for Northeast St. Elizabeth from 1959 and won all general elections until 1980, when he was defeated at the polls by the JLP candidate William J.C. Hutchinson. As you can recall, William J.C. Hutchinson, a farmer, had lost to Pagon back in 1976, but had come back to the 1980 general election with blood in his eyes. The 1980 general election saw the largest turnout of voters for the first time in Northeast St. Elizabeth. A total of 15,713 persons came out and voted, with only 147 of the ballots rejected. Obviously, majority of the voters chose the JLP's candidate. Sidney Pagon, for the first time, was defeated. The 1980 general election was also a big loss overall for the PNP, with the JLP winning 51 of the 60 parliamentary seats. The troubled 1980s belonged to the JLP, with Edward Seaga as Prime Minister for 2 consecutive terms. The PNP did not participate in the 1980 general election, leaving the JLP to take all constituencies and serve without parliamentary opposition. During that time, 1980 to 1989, Edward Seaga, leader of the JLP, ruled as Prime Minister. For such 9-year-long period, Sidney Pagon had to accept life outside of Parliament. But Sidney Pagon was not yet done. He managed to win for the final time in the 1989 general election, when he defeated JLP candidate Hugh Dawes by 3,609 votes. In total, Sidney Pagon served 6 terms as Member of Parliament for Northeast St. Elizabeth, and during his time in office, he was appointed Minister of Works and Communication, Minister of Finance, and also served as Minister of Regional Affairs. He no doubt became a legendary politician in Northeast St. Elizabeth, a legend who helped homeowners and farmers with needed supplies, assisted poor people, improved bad roads, and championed school education. And speaking of education, he played a significant role in the establishment of the Elam Agricultural School in 1979. His contribution to the birth of this school did not go unnoticed. After his death, the school was renamed Sydney Pagon Agricultural School in 2002. In 2014, the name of the school was again changed to Sydney Pagon STEM Academy. The local people, however, simply call it the Sydney Pagon School. A loyal member of the People's Political Party (PNP), Sydney Pagon proved himself as a man of good example. After he had won the 1989 general election, Sydney Pagon was looking towards serving the people of Northeast St. Elizabeth for the full term. But it was never to happen. In the year 1991, two sad events occurred. His second wife, Valerie Pagon, was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she died at home on July 13 of 1991. The following month, on August 27, Sydney Pagon died as a result of a stroke. He died aged 66 at the University Hospital of the West Indies. He was buried in the churchyard of the Goshen Moravian Church. Before visiting his grave, let us take a look at a road in Santa Cruz, St. Elizabeth, which carries his name. All right, so I am at the foot of Pagon Drive here in Santa Cruz, St. Elizabeth, and up there is Institution Drive, where you see that car coming down from, and it is now that same, and we're now going towards Pagon Drive. Very beautiful road here in Santa Cruz, and this road is located on the bypass in Santa Cruz. So if you're in Santa Cruz and you're using the bypass, meaning you're driving off the main road, maybe to avoid the traffic, then you will drive along Pagon. Right over there is the Jamaica Fire Brigade, the Santa Cruz branch. Santa Cruz Fire Station, pretty much. So, you may ask, why do they call it? Why did they call it Pagon? Well, as we know, Sydney Pagon's work in Santa Cruz here, in the whole Northeast St. Elizabeth, are is extensive. There are many things that he had done here in Northeast St. Elizabeth. And the completion of this part of the road here in the bypass is just one of his works. So because he fixed this road, and it's a long road, as you shall see, because of his work on this road, it was given his name. And you know the significance of giving a person's name to a building, to a road, to money, to anything. It's really to keep their memory going. I know, and as we know in Jamaica, there are so many roads with different names. You hear about the Marcus Garvey Drive, the Bustamante, this and the drive, and all those kind of things. They are given as a memorial. So something in Northeast St. Elizabeth has to carry Cindy Pagon's name, keep his name going, right? So we have here the Pagan Road, just as though we have the Sydney Pagan STEM Academy. And that is a school that carries his name. So as we're going along, you can see here, we are at, what is this? Here we are at 4 Pagan Road. As you can see it on that sign, 4 Pagan. Did I say Pagan Road? Pagan. 4 Pagan Drive. It's a busy road here because it's, as I say, it's on the bypass, and there are many vehicles that just avoid the main road, the traffic inside the town, and they would drive around here. Especially big vehicles like trucks. You know, you see a lot of them around here. And there are a lot of businesses around here. Hardware, restaurants, and just churches also. You know, it's a residential drive primarily. So, you know, Pagan's name was very big in politics. And it was very hard to see why, after his death, there wouldn't be things that carry his name as a memorial. His sons also got involved in politics. His sons, Donovan, and Nigel. Donovan, he became a councillor for the Braes River Division here in St. Elizabeth, and he was councillor of Braes River for, I think, over 17 years. His younger brother, Nigel, at one point put himself up to be the PNP candidate for general election, but he lost the candidate. He did not become the candidate for the PNP. So Nigel, I think if they had chosen him, if the PNP had chosen him, I think he would have been a successful candidate. It was 2010. The PNP did win the election in 2011, I think it is. You know. But anyway, Both sons joined the PNP, but unfortunately they did not have the same impact as their father. But Donovan was a successful councillor for Braze River. And as I said, Nigel Pagon, the younger brother, Nigel Pagon, put his hand to become Member of Parliament for North East, but unfortunately he did not make it. Gentlemen, ah, there you are, man. Ah. Alright, so we are here now at, there's one road that goes that way and one road that goes this way. Well, this road is where Pagan road continues. Okay, so if you travel the same direction as me, that road is where the bypass continues. But Pagan Road, it continues on the left, down here, and it continues all the way down. I'm not gonna go down there, but I'm just showing you that this is Pagan Drive. And it continues on. It continues off the bypass. So it's on the bypass, but then you turn left off the bypass. And here we're passing like, you know, I don't know, they look like they wash cars over there and some other business. So this is Pagan Drive in Santa Cruz. The name that carries the name that carries the name of the legend. People still remember Pagan for his wonderful work, his work in helping people get overseas, get on work, get on overseas work program. His work in building roads, his work in helping farmers, his work in helping through education. And it paid off. The legend, Sidney Pagan. All right, so this is my stop on the road. It continues down. I won't go any further. All right, now, so now that I've shown you Pagan Drive, let's now go to his resting place. We are now gonna head to his grave. All right, so I am at the Goshen Moravian Church here in the community of Goshen. And this church, Sidney Pagan played a significant role here. This is a church he attended. This is the community that he lived. I was going to go to his house, the house that he used to live, but I'm not going to bother, right? So this is the Goshen Moravian Church. Sidney Pagan was a lay preacher here. So, yes, he was big in politics, but he was also big, as some persons would say, he was big with God. It's a Sunday. I assume that the church would have been open by now, but there's nobody here. The gate is closed. And between you and me, I literally had to jump over the fence and come over here because I said, I'm not gonna come this far and turn back. So, in the churchyard is a small cemetery, graveyard. And of course, I've said before, this is where Sidney Pagan was buried. This is where both his wives were buried. And we're approaching their graves right now. So I'm going to look at their graves in the order that they died. So Sidney Pagan's first wife died in 1970. In 19, what again? 19. Okay, I did say it already, right? So this is the grave of his first wife, Ruby Elitha Pagan. As you know, she was born Ruby Elitha Spence, then they got married. Let's read what's written there. So here we have, it says, in sacred and ever-loving memory of Ruby Elitha Pagan Niespet, who departed this life on February 6, 1972, born on August 16, 1925. And it goes on to quote a Bible scripture where it says, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And that comes from John 11, verse 25. So, as I've told you before, she was a teacher. She was a justice of the peace. And she was the wife of Sidney Pagan. And of course, Sidney Pagan was here as she was laid to rest. And it was a big funeral. When she died, her body was at the church on display. It was here for persons to come take their final look. And she was also, her body was also brought to a different church for viewing also before, of course, it was taken here for its final resting. She was a loved woman, children lover. As I said before, she was the first principal of the Goshen Primary School until up to her death. And I can see her grave is grilled around. It's a beautiful grave, I must say. Sidney Pagan ensured that, the first woman he married and had their children with, that she got something really beautiful. It's a lovely grave. It's a lovely headstone and a lovely Bible verse to just sum everything up. So as you know, yes, it says clearly she died on the 6th of February 1972. And life went on for Sidney Pagan. He got married again to his second wife, Valerie. And then Valerie died. And let's go to her grave. As I say, I'm showing you in the order that they died. So this is the grave. Let me look at it, get a better view first. So this is the grave of Sidney Pagan's second wife, Valerie. She was way younger, very young. Sidney Pagan married a very young woman. Let's look at her date of birth now. So on her tomb here, it is written, in loving memory of a dear wife, mother, daughter, and sister, Valerie N. Pagan, born the 27th of the 3, 1952. So that would be the 27th of March, 1952. And then they said she died on the 13th of the 7th, 1991. So she died on July 13, 1991. Of course, as I've said before, I know her. I know her cause of death. I don't know the cause of death of the first wife, but I know that Valerie, she died from breast cancer, and as you can see, she was born in 1952, and then she died in 1991. Work that maths out, you would get. She was 39. Yeah, she was 39 years old. She was 39 years old. So she can see that was a very young woman. A very young woman. But breast cancer took her life. And when she died, Sydney Pagon had already suffered a stroke. Sydney Pagon had suffered a stroke. So you can see the both of them were ill. Sydney Pagon suffering from a stroke he had received, and then Valerie dying from cancer. And she died just a month before Sydney. So it's like the both of them were not helpful to each other, because though she was young, just in her 30s, she was suffering from breast cancer. She was dying. The doctors made it clear the cancer had already spread over her body. So she was pretty much at home just waiting to die. And then Sydney Pagan, on the other hand, was suffering from a stroke and was not even able to help. So the both of them were not able to help each other. So she died on the 27th of March. No, sorry. She died on the 13th of July, 1991. Between both wives is the man himself, Sydney Pagan. So there is the grave of the first wife, that's the grave of the second wife, and in the middle is the grave of Sydney Pagan himself. He's lying here with both wives at his side. And I'm sure those wives are not arguing at all. I don't think Ruby's arguing with Valerie. You know. So in death, he is having the both wives at his side. And I think they did this deliberately, because Ruby died and then Valerie. So they made a space in between, because Sydney Pagan, of course, after he received the stroke, he was still in office. He won the 1989 general election for Northeast St. Elizabeth. Then when he suffered the stroke, he was unable to carry out the duties of his office. So he gave up, he retired, and the PNP had to have a by-election. And Roger Clark won the by-election, and Roger Clark took over after Sydney Pagan. So, because they knew he was going to die, the stroke had crippled pretty much half of his body, you know. So even at the death of his wife, from even at the death of his wife Valerie from cancer, they knew it would not be long after, and it was not. So let's look at Sydney Pagan's grave a little closer. And here we have it here, and it says, the sun is so hot, I can't see the screen. Okay, it says sacred to the memory of a dear and loving father. Let me move this a little. To a dear and loving father, Sidney Ralph Pagon, born July 28, 1925, departed this life August 27, 1991. And at the bottom it says, too dearly loved to be forgotten. Alright, so we come to the end of the story of Sidney Pagon, leaving him as he lay in peace with both wives at his sides. Hope you have enjoyed this chapter. Remember to like, comment, and if there's a story in St. Elizabeth that you would love me to cover, you can also leave your request in the comment section. Alright guys, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again in more interesting videos like this.